everybody. Welcome to episode number 2 of Bill K's Cockeyed Caravan, my podcast coming to you live from Movie Studio Apartment. It's a movie studio apartment because it's a movie studio in a studio apartment, the ultimate efficiency in Hollywood proactive behavior here. I was fortunate enough to make a movie out of this apartment, The Solar Opposite. Catch it sometime. If you can, welcome. I'm here again trying to explore the nether reaches of my mind and hoping I could shed a little light inside of yours. It's not September. It's June 28th, approaching July 4th, and even though we're only a few days removed from the summer solstice and things are sunny and bright, it seems like we've stumbled into the darkest of times, at least politically so. For anybody who's watching the news, who's cosmopolitan-minded, who's multicultural, who cares about all things creative and the forever expanding umbrella of social justice, all those things seem to be under assault as I speak here alone in my little cubicle. If you're not aware, a new vacancy has become available on the Supreme Court, and another opportunity for the PVP, and that being Putin's vice president, who's happily ensconced on Pennsylvania Avenue. Another opportunity exists for him to put his vicious stamp on the American future. And clearly, the battle lines are going to be drawn, and as the fall approaches over the course of this summer, the temperature in the political contest will be at an all-time high, to be sure. What's in the balance? Well, firstly and foremostly, this is the once-in-a-generation opportunity for those in the religious right to finally, after years of trying, scraping away at the edifice of women's right to choose, it'll be their big fat chance to take a big whack at Roe v. Wade. And maybe this is where the red tide finally peaks and will yield to a more sane political future. My guess, or my hope, is that there will be a massive overreach by the Trump-topian forces here, and they will pay the price, if not in the Supreme Court, for sure at the ballot box, I'm hoping at least. The only remedy, in my view, is to vote, and if you want to protect free speech, speak freely. That's what I'm trying to do here, without much preparation, I might add. So it's kind of a dark day, in my whole life. I born in 1956. I'm not hiding anything. I'm 62. I'm as old as I've ever been at this moment, and alternatively, I'm as young as I'll ever be. But over the span of my lifetime, beginning just before my lifetime, 1954, Brown v. Board of Education, the Supreme Court decision that basically outlawed segregation, Jim Crow. It put the legal kind of nail in that coffin, but of course it didn't come. There were no real results as a result of that decision until people challenged it on the streets, in the lunch counters, in the buses, in housing, until people really took direct action to demand that the federal government enforce this decision. Did those walls come in some, tumbling down to some degree. But my larger point is, since then, with some recent exceptions, we've seen this expanding umbrella of social justice sort of spread out over the American landscape. First, of course, it was, voting rights and the, fair housing and the Civil Rights Act and equal access to public accommodations, all these things that were denied for so many generations, actually. Those things began to crumble, and later we saw the same effect, for women and LGBTQ and Miranda rights. And we saw this, basically the Supreme Court seemed to be a place where, at least in the law, rights were expanded, and the opportunity to seek social justice, was redeemed positively by Supreme Court decisions. But that seems to have reached its apex, I guess, in the last few years. I think starting most dramatically in 2001 with Gore, versus Bush. The Supreme Court intervened and ensured, I think, and then we had Citizens United, which guaranteed corporations the full rights of citizenship and the First Amendment rights, as if they could be conferred on an organization as well as a person. And most recently, we've seen Trump's, the PVP's immigration position affirmed by a conservative Supreme Court. We've seen labor laws now, the rights to organize. The labor movement has taken a beating on the head from the Supreme Court, specifically in the public sector. And now a new seat has become vacant, and to be sure, reproductive rights will be on the table. And it seems like we're just going full speed backwards when it comes to things that had, been contested in the past. And I think that just goes to show that progress is not an irreversible thing. It can suffer setbacks and trauma, and we're in the midst of that now. And for someone who's a comedian like myself, or a wannabe comedian, I think the alternative name for this podcast could be Rebel Without Applause, because I've not been on stage much recently. So this microphone is my own outlet right now, absent an audience. Hopefully that'll change sometime sooner than later. But in the meantime, here I am babbling away. And if there's one truth that has occurred to me, is that my need to express, to speak, is far outweighs anybody's desire to hear me. So here I am alone speaking, fulfilling my desire at nobody's expense, unless somehow you turn into the Cockeyed Caravan. Why the Cockeyed Caravan? I said it in the first episode. I'll say it again in this. The Cockeyed Caravan is the last line of one of my favorite movies, Sullivan's Travels, Preston Sturges' classic comedy. And Cockeyed Caravan, I just like that name, and it alliterates with Bill Kalmanson, Bill K's Cockeyed Caravan. So welcome once again. And what are the big questions that are out there that I'm ruminating over? I think the first one that well outweighs any political considerations, the trauma of Trumptopia. The big question that is just looming over all of us is, where will LeBron James be this fall? Now, as a dedicated Angelino, I'm hearing, every day that in all likelihood it will come to the Lakers. My feelings about it are mixed. Why? I've always rooted against the guy. He's been an overdog. He doesn't seem like a Laker. Seems like the great Lakers successes of the past seem to emerge from Lakers. Players that, seem to come out of the Laker culture, had some big connection to Los Angeles, even though Kareem was a trade. He had made his name here at UCLA. And I just don't feel that way about LeBron. I don't know. Will that feel like a Laker win if he's imported and gets to wear that uniform? I don't know. I mean, I can't dispute or debate his talent. And I will say this, over the last few years, I've come to respect and even appreciate him more. At first, he bugged me. I felt like despite his talent and ability, he was spoiled. He didn't really know how to lose. He was ungracious at those moments in his career. But over time, you've seen the growth, or I've seen the growth, and he's learned how to lose. And in those years has also become a champion. So there's no denying his stature as an athlete and even as a person. And on balance, yes, the Lakers would be massively improved were he to be, were he to come here. But we'll see. I don't know. There's something about it. Even if he does come here, they're going to be better than the Warriors. I don't know. So that's my hot sports take here from the biased perch of a fan. My people aren't giving me any inside information other than what I hear on the radio. So, but that is the big question. I think it looms over us every second, and once we dispose of that, I think we'll be able to concentrate more on the Supreme Court and other things in my life. What's going on? I'm still rocked. I'm unsettled. I'm bothered, and about the mystery that is Anthony Bourdain. It just hasn't left, the forefront of my consciousness. How somebody, from my point of view, the guy was living the most adventurous, exciting, creative life. He was living the life that, I can only kind of grab in bits and pieces when I enjoy my own travels. This year I was fortunate enough to go to Palau and scuba dive, and I've been to Vietnam and sampled the cuisine and walked the streets and questioned people and sort of made my amends as an American to the catastrophe precipitated by us on the Vietnamese people. And, these are things that he does seemingly on a weekly basis. At least that's as I catch it on CNN. And yet, the guy offed himself. And since then, I've read his book. I read Kitchen Confidential. I'm in the middle of another one. And the guy was just so talented and so full of life. And I think it was in the last chapter or two of Kitchen Confidential, he's talking about how some of his peers who were also in the grip of heroin, some decades past, in all likelihood would not survive, but that he would, and that nothing would take him down. And it was so affirmative, and yet a moment came in his life where he chose another path. And this, and this is bugging me because there's unnamed people in my own personal life who I will protect, who are also entertaining this irreversible option. And it made me wonder if indeed suicide is contagious. I hope not, because if so, we might be on the brink of a major outbreak. So I'm still dealing with the Anthony Bourdain thing. I guess not so much as a question of grief, because it's not my loss. He's not someone I knew individually or personally. I'm not suffering from that, but I'm really saddened by it, and the mystery of it is overwhelming. And I'm reading him, and I recommend reading him because he's a good writer, and he takes you to different places and times in a state of being that's, I don't know, it's very honest. And every time I cook a meal now, I'm taking greater pains to clean the surfaces and all those things that, important chefs do. So I'm still thinking about Tony. I can call him Tony now because I've read 1.5 of his books, and that leaves me entitled. Elsewhere in the big life of BK, those of you that know me will know this. I acquired and adapted David Halberstam's book, The Children, and adapted into a screenplay. And it's been my life's mission over the last 5 years to somehow bring this to the screen. Hopefully as a movie, perhaps as a television series. We're in a totally new world order of media delivery, with the Netflix and subscription-based video on demand, watch when you want to watch TV series. It just renders the world that, I grew up in, the world of networks, and even HBO quaint, distant, and old-fashioned. So I don't know if, when, or how this project of mine, for which I paid a lot of money, will find its place in the public consciousness. For those of you that don't know about David Halberstam, he was I consider him one of the iconic American chroniclers of the American 20th century. He wrote brilliantly about Vietnam. You might recall his breakthrough book, which really made him famous, was The Best and the Brightest. And then, he was prolific, 40 or more books, often on the bestseller list. He wrote about journalism, politics, war, peace. A great book called The 50s, which really was a really interesting inquiry into the meaning of that decade and who were the sort of important figures in it and why it was transformative. And he wrote about sports, the Red Sox, Olympic rowers, basketball. He was all over the map, but a great writer and a master of the profile. And amongst his books, the one that caught my attention, sort of accidentally, I might say, was The Children. And as a sidelight, Halberstam was a young reporter in Nashville in 1960. And as fate would have it, he had a front row seat to what was the emerging civil rights movement that really started there. And he had an opportunity to observe it and write about it for the Nashville Tennessean. Years, actually decades later, he returned to that subject and wrote The Children, which was his up-close and personal account of these handful of young African-American students, not really children, we would call them young adults, undergraduates, who got trained in the disciplines and strategies of Mahatma Gandhi, who had revolutionized India. And he used the young people who got taught these tools, applied them as a way to dismantle the problem that faced them every day in the American South, and that was segregation. They did it first, of course, at the lunch counters, and then later on the buses. They were known as the Freedom Riders, before they ended up in the spring and early summer of 1961 in that most cruel of American prisons, Parchman Penitentiary in Mississippi, which was basically a slave plantation disguised as a work farm and had made to look like a state penitentiary. And so these young, most modern and most forward-looking of young people found themselves in a place that was more reminiscent of pre-Civil War slavery than mid-century America in the 20th century. The most famous person in this story, who's known to us today, is John Lewis. He was absorbed more beatings and took more punishment than any of these young people, all in the service of his ideal, which was of this beloved community. And he and the other three were led by this least likely, of leaders, Diane Nash. She was from Chicago. She was quite beautiful. She was fair-skinned, debutante-like in her demeanor, a beauty contest winner. And she arrived at Fisk University in Nashville. And against, her own first impression, became the steely-eyed leader of these young people. And without Diane and the sit-in kids, which indeed included John Lewis and James Bevel, and who was her love interest and is at the core of, this story dramatically, is their relationship, and also Bernard Lafayette. And the story focuses on these four young people, and they're mentored by this divinity student who was at Vanderbilt at the time, had recently returned from India, and he mentors or tutors them in these Gandhian techniques. So these are like the core four players and Lawson, and it's their journey across 1960 and 1961. At least that's the scope of my script. The scope of the book is much wider. It's so what I created was really a massive act of reduction, and sometimes you have to do that to find the truth. And that's what I did. I wrote the screenplay and then rewrote it a million times. The children, and I've been out and about trying to put it together. Sadly, today or yesterday now, I was in negotiation with Sony Tri Star, and they had made a very meager and unenthusiastic offer to me to do this as a limited series, and I was excited about that prospect, but they never wanted to talk to me about it. Sadly, one of the lead executive in the whole endeavor died in the midst of our conversations, and they really never picked up the ball. And when we made a counteroffer, it was summarily and quickly refused, and the offer withdrawn. So I am back now where I was a few months ago, looking, turning over every stone. No stone unturned, no turn unstoned. And that's life in Hollywood, at least for me. And you folks have been terrific here. And this will be, I think we'll just wrap this up. That's what's going on in my life. There's always the political dimension, dealing with the scourge of the PvP, trying to stay happy in troubling times, keep our sanity, our hopefulness, stay happy, whatever that is, and however you can do it. And then we talked about LeBron and the Supreme Court and the Lakers and my adventures or misadventures in Hollywood. And once again, thank you as joining me on my cockeyed caravan here, live from Movie Studio Apartment. Over and out.